Observation 1 is the resolution. The U.S. should impose economic sanctions on Venezuela. Observation 2 is the inherency. The first argument is that Venezuela is ramping up state-sanctioned violence and status quo against protesters. They have been ignoring human rights violations and firing on anytime there are protesters who are protesting against the CS corruption in the government. The second argument is that Maduro and etc. are able to enforce their violence against the protesters because socialism insulates them from the effects of their actions, indicating that since they have control of things like resources in the economy, they don't actually feel the personal hurt from their actions, which means they can basically do what they want. So observation 3 is the plan. The U.S. should impose economic sanctions on Venezuela by denying visas, blocking property, and freezing U.S. assets of Maduro and his party. So basically sanction Maduro and the Communist Party. Observation 4 is the solvency. The first argument is that the U.S. has the jurisdiction to do this. Under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act basically says that Obama can establish sanctions against individuals from other countries when in an emergency situation, such as the protests in Venezuela. Advantage 1 is Rez The United States. A is the uniqueness. Status communism is spreading throughout Latin America and the status quo. The first argument is that Venezuela is the poster child of the movement. Chavez and the quote-unquote economic benefits of his regime have been propped up by socialism and it's been upheld as like a shining example of what socialism can be, even though Venezuela is largely propped up by corruption and things like that, and their economy is actually quite slow. The second argument is that domino theory indicates that powerful and successful regimes tend to spread because others will emulate them. That is to say that when you have a powerful regime that is seen as a good regime, such as Venezuela, other nations around that tend to copy the things that Venezuela is doing, leading to the spreading of those kinds of theories of government. The third argument is that to wit, there have been communist movements in the Venezuelan sphere of thinking in Bolivia, Ecuador, Nicaragua, and others are also at risk of this kind of thinking, indicating that Venezuelan thinking about government is spreading in the status quo. And the fourth argument is that despite appearances, Venezuela is very unstable. Their economy is stagnant, and the kinds of movements they're taking via the government are unsustainable. For example, they subsidize gas, so it's something like 6 cents a gallon, which means that the government is spending massive amounts of money, making it look like things are good for the people. Also, the government is ignoring the actual will of the people, as we saw with the protests, where their protests against corruption, Maduro's response is basically just to shoot the protesters. B is the impact. Red spread causes violence. The first argument is that red spread replicates the kind of issues that we see with Venezuela, that is, ongoing cycles of violence between the people and the government. The governments can't actually provide for the popular needs because they're too busy focusing on things that just make them look good, which means that people tend to protest against corruption in the government and things like that, but then the government has control of the resources and the government just stomps out the protests. We see this causes endless cycles of violence in places like Venezuela as well as places like Colombia. The second argument is that you should preference this impact. It is ongoing, systemic, and empirically verifiable, and it creates endless cycles of death. That is, it's ongoing, the conflict does not stop. It kills more and more people with each generation as it goes on because the government cannot be quite overthrown, but it's still, people still have the ability to resist. C is the problem. The plan collapses the illusion of a strong Venezuela and is able to resolve the spread of this kind of thinking. The first argument is the plan decreases the ability of leaders like Maduro to function because we're taking personal sanction efforts against him, which means that he has to listen, as opposed to if we were to sanction his country, he'll probably ignore it. The second argument is the plan shows that the U.S. is taking a very strong stance at the issue, which means that the U.S. is throwing its soft power behind this issue, and is showing that the U.S. is not going to stand for this kind of action. The third argument is the plan disrupts the illusion of strong Venezuela. It shows that it is in fact just an illusion, and Venezuela is actually quite weak because other nations are able to take immediate actions in order to check back for it. The fourth argument is that now is the key time because the protests that are ongoing in Venezuela indicate the U.S. has to help the protesters before they're stomped out entirely. And the fifth argument is that Venezuela is the key country to take action and is identified there as the poster country for the region. The last argument I should make here is that we're not saying like communism bad, so don't take rhetoric impacts from that. We're saying that the ways it's been implemented in Venezuela lead to these kinds of violence, and so the verbiage we're using is specific to this context, so don't read into this. Question?
Where exactly are these assets? Like where you say you're going to sanction?
Right. U.S. bank accounts, money that's held by U.S. corporations, money that's influenced by U.S. banks, things of that nature.
So it's in there.
Yeah. Advantage 2 is empathy. Basic point is uniqueness. Current structure of parliamentary debate re-entrenched patterns of violence against what we see as disposable populations. The first argument is the debate teaches us to pursue race-embodied impacts while ignoring something like structural and systemic violence. It's only extinction-level impacts matter. It means that we're taught to ignore systemic impacts because they don't access something that can be weighed out in the context of the realm. The second argument is that this kind of thinking keeps us from actually empathizing with the other because we only care about people groups if we can find some sort of crazy internally from them to extinction instead of caring about people groups just because they're human beings. The third argument is that this type of thinking is what creates disposable populations. We can justify ongoing perpetual violence or even perpetuating violence against groups because we see that their lives functionally don't matter in the context of the debate space as long as they can be outweighed by something else. The fourth argument is that the ways in which we interact in debate affect the ways we interact in the real world. We're all going to be citizens and not policymakers one day, and the strategies we use in debate have a tangible impact on our thought process. For example, we tend to say, oh, Russia did this is how I can use this in debate. It creates a lens through which we view the world, which is why we need to be self-reflective about the practices that we engage in debate and how they change the way we view the world. B is the impact. Ignoring structural violence in debate leads us to ignore and perpetuate violence in the real world. First argument is that the mentality that only extinction level impacts don't matter make us like Dick Cheney, who was a foreign policy debater who then went on to pioneer Bush's Iraq strategy, which he said there is a big impact, i.e. Saddam Hussein could have like these weapons of mass destruction that have a like 1% chance of blowing up and causing extinction. Therefore, we should take this pattern of violence against Iraq and invade the country and cause thousands of deaths and all sorts of instability because we're only looking for 1% kind of impact. Second argument is that this reduces structural violence in the real world. The reason why oppressive regimes continue to exist is because those that have the power to oppose them don't functionally care to oppose them because they embrace the kind of thinking that it doesn't matter as long as it doesn't affect me personally. The third argument is that the focus on flashpoint impacts above all else paralyzes social justice. When you only think about the 1% risk of impact, you're always afraid to do anything because there's always a 1% risk that could cause an extinction level impact, which means that you never take any kind of violence to stop structural violence. This is bad because it means that things like structural violence become inevitable, and structural violence always ends up killing more people than people that are killed by flashpoint impacts in the long run anyway. C is the solvency. Embracing the affirmative by voting Aff is key to reconceptualizing this approach to debate. First argument is that the ballot is a tool of political choice. Endorsing the affirmative grants legitimacy and reifies the idea that structural violence matters and that we as debaters and people should care about issues beyond their ability to live to extinction. The second argument is that the Aff forces a reconsideration of how we prioritize political options. The Aff forces the oppressed to the center of political engagement where they can't be ignored because we say this is their plight and this is what matters, and you can't just outweigh this and then say that this population doesn't matter anymore. The third argument is that the things we endorse in debate affect the things that we endorse in the real world. Your affirmation of our speech act is able to create empathy as we attempt to identify and empower oppressed individuals that we identify via our uniqueness arguments. And the fourth argument is that lines of flight exist in any system or structure of thought. You never know where the lines of flight exists or where the one shape is that can take out the entirety of the system, indicating that any tool of political choice is key to resolving this kind of thinking and changing the way we view things in the real world.
Thank you. Yeah, run that for me, y'all?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk for a while.
Say something.
Yeah. A lot of people would probably want 4 pieces of paper while I talk.
Any of them long?
I'm not too proud to say that I'm making an occasional garbage argument.
I thought we had to wait till after the tournament to get trashed.
Obviously not. Haven't you seen McKendry at awards?
They went first.
Yeah.
And Red slept to show how wonderful he was.
I loved the shout out when you were looking over at him. He's just passed out, chin on his chest.
Class.
Everyone good to go. A is the thesis. The first argument is the Western philosophical tradition historically values the illusion of pure and absolute present over that of the absent. All meaning and value is attributed to centers of truth that are homogenized. The construction of visible, tangible, and normalized centers of truth leads to the perfect entities capable of absolute solution. These centers are typically constructed as God, the nation state, government, and most importantly, the law. The second argument is that the ultimate presence becomes the textual stability of the law. Law is constructed as logos, specifically the text and ideology of the present, which we constantly reference to verify our own actions. The third argument is that the law does not exist without writing and giving unique value to it. We force law's privilege and position within the system. Law is formed as grammar, which is always privileged within any system of writing, such as the ones that we are using in the debate today. This embodies the hierarchical status of the present, thus excluding the periphery. Next are the links. First, fiat is illusory. We assume immediate and tangible impacts coming out of it. The creation of present item privileges presence over the absolute. Before debating, we must establish some perfect world through the use of a plain text. The second argument is that the plain text in debate becomes the logos. The little a is that plain text is comprised of very few words, but has the most significance in the round. The focus of our attention turns to the text. We even read it twice in and write copies to hand to other people, which we don't do with anything else in the debate ever. The B is that this creates a grammatical hierarchy on the flow because it privileges text above all else. This all else leads to, or all else that is said in the debate either leads up to it as background or is based off of it as advantages. The C is that the plan text is a replication of law for two reasons. First, it is effectively a law in round that we are talking about the effects of passing, and second, it mimics a policy action that we wish to take in the real world that would come in the form of a law. And D is that, I'll get you at the very end, D is that the negative can only advocate through a counterplan, and textual competition is a very common argument under this framework. Is a reason why the plan text has become logos. The third argument is that the plan text functionally excludes arguments by centering and limiting the debate. It silences all arguments from the periphery by saying, I'm sorry, that doesn't actually attach to my plan text, when really the broader discussion needs to be at the fundamental theoretical implications of a resolution, not just what this one limited policy would do. C are the impacts. The first argument is violence. When we pose a center of truth that leads to the violent exclusion of the periphery. This is a direct reason for violence against difference, because it creates a hierarchical value of the present over that of the periphery. This is proved through two scenarios. The little a is that we use it in military jurisdiction to protect the nation state by enforcing borders and enacting violence against those that wish to cross the borders. The little b is that you can look to gender categories where doctors violently remove organs of intersex individuals because they don't neatly fit into our logo. So are you male or are you female? The second argument is that the law is powerful because it is codified and privileged, and that is it. That is the only reason that it holds any value in the world. The terminal impacts of this are first that we solely focus on the plan text. It kills all other methods of focusing on the resolution and kills education as a result. But second, all violence can be attributed to textual stability. When text becomes a law, it just recreates the fear of difference that is inherent in our legal system. This exclusion is the root cause of death. By telling individuals that they are unimportant as a result of their lack of location with respect to the plan, we just justify their death. Therefore, the affirmative is maintaining the root of all violence in society. And the third impact is that this turns the case impacts, because the affirmative just reinforces and recreates the problems that they are attempting to isolate. Thus, the alternative reject the affirmative by placing it under erasure. This means crossing it out on your flow. The solvency. The first is that this is a key destabilization of grammar and is therefore a destabilization of the metaphysics of the present. Erasure is a revolutionary linguistic tool of problematizing the perceived perfection of the plan text. We are acting as linguistic rebels in this round by rejecting the idea that all stability needs to come from words. The second is that the empirics are on our side. Derrida, Heidegger, and Spivak all use this to expose the multiplicity of meaning that's excluded by a stable logos, thus breaking down language and allowing alternative voices to be heard. This is key to increasing education by showing the problems associated with this use of language. Third is that erasure is good. The little a is that it inverts the perception of perfection by focusing on the text within itself. The little b is that we need balance. You can look to Derrida's description of the trace, which says that we need to combine aspects of both, and that we can't do that when we give ultimate presence to text. The little c is that we make rigid structures malleable by opening new channels for education, because we have critically rejected the idea that text needs to be at the center of the debate. The d is that this represents a new existential ethic. We are against violence. We create a new space to utilize the ethic of the masses. And the little e is that we are solvent independent of a movement, because textual erasure forces a rethinking of the ideology behind the present. The act of rebelling breaks down logos critically. Framework. So I'll get you to the end of this. We don't think fiat debate is fun. We are not pre-fiat, we are not post-fiat, we transcend fiat. Fiat only exists with a plain text. Therefore, through erasure, we are living in a world without this idea of fiat. Fiat is a distinction that is arbitrary and violent because it just excludes the periphery and excludes education from discussions and academic debate. Second, we need to evaluate questions of epistemology over instances of policymaking. The little a is that grammar shapes our perception of policymaking. So through this criticism, we can look at the epistemological roots of this. And the little b is that policies are just collections of grammatical structures. So all policymaking will necessarily link back to this. You got a question?
Yeah. Way back on your links, you say that we're bad because our plan limits debate, but then you say that fiat is illusory and thus exclude everything the 1AC said. How is that not linking with your criticism?
No, because the argument is that utilization of a plain text excludes arguments from the periphery by centering it to one specific thing, which would otherwise allow the inclusion of a multitude of arguments within the resolution. However, because these do not relate to the plain text, these arguments about excluded periphery populations are thus rejected. If you want to make an argument about it being a link to the criticism, do it on your own side. All right, let's look to advantage one. Let's look to specifically their link level. If this were true that we were able to solve just by using economic disincentives, then we would already have seen something like this with Russia, but we still see large problems coming out of Russia despite our recent sanctioning of them. And next on advantage two. Oh.
No, you didn't know it.
We must stand and flow.
You guys,
Yeah, I don't know what.
yeah, it's going to be the framework, followed by case and order, followed by thesis, links, thesis, all policy, impacts. No links will be unblocked. Argument here is that fiat is absolutely not illusory. At the point that it's not arbitrary, but we actually use it as a tool for policymakers to be able to look at what impacts are actually happening in order to figure out who is marginalized by which policies and which policies actually act as advocacy for those who are marginalized. Fiat is a major key to make sure that one, we're not using judge intervention, but two, also making sure that as policymakers and future citizens, we're able to actually work in order to make the best policy options. Policy options are inevitable. This is a realism argument, right? There are going to be people making decisions, whether it be in the real world as citizens or real world as policymakers. The key is to make sure that we can make the best decisions possible for all people. Second argument they make here is that you're evaluating epistemology over policy. They say that grammar shapes our education. However, we're going to say that one, even if you buy this, we're operating within a good epistemology. You can cross-apply our advantage two here as to why we are making a very good decision for the real world, right? We're saying that as debaters, we need to focus on the marginalized in order to actually make advocacy for them, which means that we're operating under this very well, but also that our policy is going to be a way to actually evaluate that epistemology. We look to the impacts in order to evaluate that. The third argument they say is that policies are always going to link and this is always going to be problematic. We're going to say that, one, anything that they're saying is also going to link because they're still using the English language based on flow text, which still have the written linguistics in order to do this. So one, if you're arguing with the link argument, they're still going to link just as hard. But two, we're going to say that policies are absolutely key in order to actually solve that for anything. Go to case. The only argument they have on case is going on to advantage one. They say that the economic sanctions would have already solved Russia. Russia is a completely different case, and the economic sanctions were only placed earlier this week, which means that one, we don't know if they're going to solve in the future, and two, this is always going to be a very different case at the point that Maduro is having a very different kind of rights violation than is Russia. At the point that Maduro literally has 40% dependency on the United States because their 95% oil dependency is on the U.S., that means that we have a better propensity to solve this. But I want you to go to advantage two. Well, first, on advantage one, pull across the impacts and solvency specifically. You're always going to prefer the impact of the cyclic systemic impact of the violence. At the point that we are saying that we are able to solve the problematic violence, this is always going to be a reason to prefer the affirmative. But I want you to go down to advantage 2, because I actually like this a lot better. So on advantage 2, we are seeing that as debaters, we are actually shaped by how we act in this space. We are shaped by the policies that we talk about and how we talk about them. At the point that Zach and I are coming up here and saying that, look, as debaters, we need to not ignore structural violence, but do something in order to actively help with that, you are always going to preference this impact because we're able to get rid of the paralyzation of social justice as addressed in our point 3, and also look at this real-world structural violence in order to make sure that when we see real problems happening in the real world, whether it be as citizens or policymakers, we're able to respond accordingly. I want you to specifically pull across policy point 1 where we say that the ballot is a tool. This is what they are not contesting. This is going to be problematic for them when we're saying that we can actually use ballot as a tool to advocate for empathy. That is a very good epistemology. So even if you're giving them their framework argument, that's always going to be preferable there. You can also pull across that we're able to have lines of light, which means that we're always going to be able to solve better, not only for this one issue, but also for the issues of others. With that, let's go on to their thesis. They say that we're looking at a clear absolute versus not, and because of that, we have a construction of normalized education and normalized understanding of the way that things work. We're going to be able to say that our policy actually reverses this by putting those who are normally marginalized, those who are usually cast aside, into the spotlight. In order to do this, we're not looking at one absolute understanding, but looking at the marginalization of people and their voices and bringing those voices to light. If you're looking at linguistics, this is going to be the #1 key to advocacy, because the voices of other people combining in intersectional ideas is always going to be the best way to solve for anything. Zach, is there anything else you want to know? Going on to the alternative, the first argument I want here is PERM, do the alternative and all non-competitive parts of the alternative. Yeah, do the affirmative and all non-competitive parts of the alternative. Basically, just get rid of the reject affirmative. We're going to be able to say that you can always do this because you're actually able to literally cross something out on your flow but still vote affirmative. There's no reason why that's mutually exclusive. The second argument I want here is going to be do the affirmative and do the alternative in all other instances. This lets them solve for 99.9% of their affirmative or alternative. But our case, especially Advantage 2, shows you why our case is actually a good idea. So taking this is always going to be a net benefit to the firm. The firm is always going to be preferable over the alt itself. The net benefits of the firms in general are, 1, they're stating the political. By rejecting the affirmative, you are rejecting our ability to operate within the structures and the places that we occupy. As such, we're not able to actually address structural issues such as violence through political and micro-political advocacy. The second argument I want here is coalition building. If you're not able to talk to people and actually allow them to join their movements, then their movements are never going to be able to solve anything. Under their all solvency. The first argument they make here is that the linguistic tool means that they're rebels. However, 1, the firm is always going to solve back for this, and 2, they're not actually being rebels at the point that they're still using linguistics in and of themselves. The next argument they make here is that the erasure is good because you need a balance. We're saying that we're providing the balance by using linguistics, but also helping other people within it, bringing the marginalized to light, which is always going to create the malleability that they say, whereas they actually don't have malleability because they're making a dichotomy of you accept or reject this. That increases any malleability they want. The next argument they say is that there's a representation of new ethic of the masses. However, there's no masses at the point that they don't have coalition building because they force you to be for or against them. They're also not allowing people who function linguistically, people who maybe are not able to speak in order to join their movement, which means that they're never able to actually solve for all people. They actually create new peripheries by not allowing people who speak or who communicate in such ways to communicate in their own way. The next argument, they say that they're solving without a movement because they break down logos critically. However, at the point that you don't have a movement, they don't actually solve. They're only using it for a ballot, which also makes it the competition is going to mean that they have no solvency for this whatsoever. They're not breaking down logos. All they're doing is trying to win a ballot. It also is never going to solve Advantage 2 because they're not looking at things through an empathetic lens. Going on to the impacts. The impact trend I wanted to this is that unless we can describe a problem, we are never going to be able to actually understand it, which means that the violence actually does become inevitable. The PERM solves by including the plan and the PMC descriptions of the status quo violence. The next argument I wanted to hear, they say that violence is an exclusion of the periphery. You can cross by my argument that we actually use linguistics to actually bring people out of the periphery. If you're looking at how societies progress, it's by people talking, it's by think tanks, it's by people coming together to discuss ideas and how to actually make things better. At the point that you collapse that, you collapse any hope of societal progress. They say that violence is contributed to textual stability. However, 1, violence preceded language, right? Violence consisted way before language actually developed. And 2, turned because language is always going to be key to progress so you can discuss ideas. They say three of this turns case, but one, there's not really a warrant to this. They only say that we're re-entrenching impacts, but they don't really explain why. At the point that we are actually taking a new kind of action in order to reverse past policies, this is going to be much more influential. Finally, go to the links. There's one major argument I want here. They can say that we're using English. We are, but they are too, right? At the point that they have an alt text, they link into this just as much, which means that their linguistic argument is never going to actually work. They say that grammar is key, but the grammar that they use is still requiring you to do something with text itself, which, yeah.
And they limit this voice of the PMC, which is the
They also, what is it?
They limit the voice of the PMC.
They also are limiting the voice of the PMC, which means that they link by uniquely excluding the PMC and the NG member, which means they're never able to actually solve for this.
Sweet, thank you.
I'll make sure it's something.
Cool.
What's up? No. Okay. So I'm going to start talking about this framework discussion. I'll let you find this page. Our argument is that if you have the time, like the things we talk about, if you vote affirmative, it's not going to actually create any real change in the world. Our argument here is that we should be focusing on debates based on fundamental allows for exclusion. It's inclusionary of not only different voices, but also of the different people. Our argument here is not a criticism of linguistics, a criticism of the English language. Our criticism is one of the plan text, of the usage of your perfection, that a 12-word sentence is going to be able to create the entire change in the world, and that there's no other ability for us to be able to make any change or be able to talk about anything absent the plan text. This is our criticism. Our argument here is that we can create a fundamental change within the debate space, a different ethic that allows for more individuals to make to join the discussion to make real change within the world. It means that a lot of your arguments that the MG is making just straight up do not apply. The first argument we make here on the framework discussion is that the fiat is a tool for policymakers. Fine, you get to make your discussion of changes within the world, but our argument here is about the usage of the plain text, which means that your argument here doesn't apply. You still get access to these arguments within our framework, but you don't get. But your arguments about fiat don't function in this way. You can still have a judge render a effective decision about the actual arguments, not about the plain text itself. Means that your arguments about fiat don't work and don't function. Additionally, your second argument about policy options being inevitable don't work within this structure. You should look to the entirety of the alternative textbook, the alternative solitude will tell you, or the thesis page, where we tell you that the structures that you are creating through this attempt to focus on the perfect, that anything else is vitally excluded, only creates these problems that you talk about. It means that policy options may be inevitable, but that's not a reason why we should be focusing on them in the debate space. It means that your argument here doesn't matter. Additionally, the next argument here is that you are offering a good epistemology, but when you're conceding a lot of the length level that the plan text, that you're focused on the plan text and you're focused on this perfection only entrenches the violent epistemology, means that even if the arguments you're making on the advantages are good, it does not matter because of the fact that you are still recreating these violence.
Also, they're offering a methodology, not an epistemology.
Yes, additionally, they're offering a methodology, not epistemology. Their argument here is that their approach to the world should be focused on. That's fine, but our argument here is that your epistemology, your attempt to function through this plain text is necessarily the problem. The last argument we make here is that we are still using the English language, so we link. This is not the criticism of the English language. It is a criticism of your attempt to create a local-centered, a law-focused creation within the debate space, and that this focus is what creates problems. It vitally excludes people. Our argument here is that we need to create destabilization of this local centrism in order to be able to create real change. I'm going to talk about the thesis now. They make an argument that the policy is what reverses, that their policy reverses this, and that linguistics is key to advocacy. First, they don't particularly warrant this analysis. And our argument here is that they're not going to be able to access this petition. Secondly, you should cross-apply the analysis that I'm giving you on the framework discussion that their attempt to focus on these policies is what creates this problem. Our argument here is that they can access these arguments about bringing in individuals, marginalized individuals, through a different framework, and that their attempt, their focus on this plain text, saying things like, oh, that argument doesn't link because it's not off of my plain text, those kinds of arguments within the debate space are what are problematic and prevent individuals, first, from getting any education from debate, but second, violently excludes them, and that epistemology, that framework that you are putting forward is what creates violence within the structures. And that when we tell people that they are not like us, that is what creates violence. When you're conceding the entirety of the impacts level, that is what you are still going to link to that. We're going to talk about the links now. Yeah, we're going to talk about links now. They only make two arguments on this discussion. First is that we use the English language. We already answered this. It's not a question of English and grammar. It is a question of the plain text. We can destabilize grammar through the breaking down of the plain text. It's not a criticism of all use of English. It is a criticism of your usage of the plain text. The second argument we make is that we are limiting the PMC voice, and that because of this, it is excluding them from debate. This is not the question. Our argument here is that they have entire access to this discussion. They could have made every argument that they wanted to in this debate, but the fact that they are focusing through the plain text is what creates this problematic rhetoric that creates a violent exclusion. Now, I want you to extend across to a couple of Jacob's specific arguments. First, that beyond is illusory in that before we actually have this discussion, like your focus on the plain text excludes the value of all of your other arguments. That the background is just a lead up, and the advantages are just the reasons why the plan is good. It means that you are only retrenching these kinds of violent ideologies that prevent any real arguments from being discussed within the round. Additionally, you can say that it's going to cross Jacob's. They just straight conceded all of the link discussion here, that they are recreating and eliminating the debate space and preventing us from ever getting access and only silencing things more. So I want to talk about the impacts now. The first argument they make here is a term that says we need to be able to solve things and take policy action in order to do anything. First, we've already resolved this question on another sheet of paper. That if your focus on plain text only recreates your harms, only recreates the violence that you are talking about. Our argument here is that when you exclude any other aspect of this discussion, it only means that you prevent actual real change. That when we don't actually think about the value of each argument, but only the relative value to the plain text, instead it means that you are only creating and preventing us from taking any real action in the world.
You could be a good person without making a law.
Yeah, you can be a good person without making a law about a good person. Our criticism is one of the logocentrism and the law focus that you are taking necessarily means that there's no reason to why your return functions. Additionally, the second argument you make here is that we have to use linguistics to bring people out of the periphery to answer this discussion. Our argument here is that when you are creating these binaries between the perfect and the imperfect, and those that don't fit within the idea of what is good, necessarily means that you are creating violence. We have two empirical examples. First is that the military uses these kind of binaries when we create borders. We exclude those who are not part of our country because of the fact that they were not born here. Necessarily means that these violence. Additionally, you can see the gender violence issues. Necessarily means that you have multiple empirical warrants as to why you will prefer. The last argument here is that violence precedes language. The argument does not apply.
This is an important argument. Structural violence from the law did not exist before the law.
Gotcha. This is an important argument. Structural violence from the law did not exist before the law. Our argument here is that you have to break down language in order to be able to break down the violence within the system. Means that only the criticism is able to resolve these questions. To the alternative. We're going to talk about the alternative. I'm going to start with permutations. The first, I want you to group the permutations. None of them function. Our argument here is that you are putting the plain text under erasure. You are putting a line through it. This is not a text that you can perm. This is not something that you can just say, oh, we can do both. No, neither of your permutations function in any way. Only by creating a destabilization of language, by erasing the plain text on your phone, putting it in line through it, are you able to make any change. Additionally, we argue that there are the disadvantages to the permutation, the fact that you are creating a disingenuous movement, that you are only reaffirming the idea of the plain text as being central. Means that only by saying that, oh, we can perm and do both, necessarily means that you are only recreating the violence that happens. Means that you are creating also a worse form of violence by co-opting our movement. Means that only the alternative is able to resolve these issues, especially when you are saying all non-competitive parts of the alternative. This doesn't function because we only have one part of the alternative.
The last argument that they go for is a dissent to the alt about how people who can't speak aren't able to join. People who aren't literate aren't able to join their
Yes, gotcha. The last argument, this means that the rest of the permutation debate doesn't function. The last argument they go for is that we exclude people who don't understand linguistics. They are the ones that are exclusionary by those individuals who can't read your plain text, can't join your movement. It means that the rest of your discussion doesn't matter. All we need to win this debate is a destabilization of language that's created by the rejection of the affirmative. It means that all of these arguments don't matter.
Sweet, thank you for it.
I wanted one of those little stool things, and then Jonathan came up to me and was like, no,
Yeah.
you look too pretentious.
That's
Come on, man.
actually quite perspective.
I tried to carry around a little box with menus, and he was like, now you look goofy. And I was like, there's no happy medium.
No.
I just need back.
Because the trash can was so much fun.
All right, I'm going to talk for 4 minutes.
Ryan, you should go for it. Cool, man.
As an overview of this debate, when my opponents respond with linguistics good to logos is bad, they're never going to be winning the debate today because they fundamentally fail to engage the criticism. What I'm criticizing is the idea that the plain text can be an absolute center of perfection that has the ability to solve anything. My opponents respond with the English language is key to being able to solve. None of that is responsive to the criticism. Let's look specifically to the permutations that my opponents are trying to argue for. You can extend all of Corey's argumentation about how none of these can function because under the alternative, the plain text isn't even real. We crossed it out to get rid of it. Any permutation just relinks itself because it tries to maintain the existence of the plain text, which just maintains the link to the permutation and means that to the criticism, and means that they are never going to be able to solve for the criticism. That means that they will always trigger the impacts of the criticism through the permutation because it is always going to cause the violent exclusion of the periphery through the usage of logos. You can look specifically to all of my thesis arguments where I tell you that the logos is in the Western philosophical tradition what is used to privilege the pure and absolute present over the absent. That is what excludes different forms of argumentation and different kinds of reasoning. The only arguments that they go for really against the alternative are no solvency arguments about how we're not going to be able to solve if people can't join because we're not using language. We're not saying don't use language, we're saying don't use law. Law is bad. Argumentation through language is good, but writing it down and forcing that as the ultimate end-all, be-all in the world is going to always trigger these impacts. The next argument that I want to talk about is the... let's talk about their links to the criticism. Their only arguments on the link page are twofold. First, that we are all using English, so we still link. But English isn't the problem, logos is the problem. Writing down the law and codifying it through writing is a pretty serious problem, and they have not contested that. The second argument that they make is that we are limiting the voice of the PMC. But again, extend all of Corey's argumentation. We don't have a problem with the PMC making arguments. We have a problem with the PMC using the plain text. We say there are different forms of argumentation that are equally as effective and don't lead to violent exclusion of the periphery through the usage of logos. At the point at which they are never directly responsive to this and don't actually directly refute any of the arguments that I make about how they link to the criticism, they are always going to be linking. When they are linking to the criticism and they are losing the perm debate because the perm is always going to relink to the criticism, then they never get access to the debate today because they are always going to trigger the impacts and as a result are always going to lose. The argument that my opponents are probably going to be going for in the PMR is that they are using linguistics to bring individuals out of the periphery and that is good. They're going to try and use advantage 2 to outweigh the criticism. But at the point at which we tell you that you do not need a plain text in order to be able to bring individuals out of the periphery, then they are still not fundamentally responding to this criticism because they are saying that the only way we can save these people is through law. That is only a relink to the criticism. Look to the thesis where I say that individuals are always construct this as an absolute perfect center of solution making. This is a reason why they still link to the criticism. At the point at which this is their only out in the debate is actually just a relink to the criticism, and you cannot allow this to come for the PMR to come up here and try and use this to win the debate.
Alright, I still like structure, so I'm going to go advantage 2, or an overview and then advantage 2.
You want me to, I'm going to put your overview on top.
That's fine, yeah. Overview, then advantage 2, then the framework, then the links, then the impacts, and then the alternative.
What about the alternative?
Anyone not ready? 3 reasons you're voting affirmative. First, Advantage 2 is going to sort of outweigh the criticism because they have conceded throughout the entirety of the round that your tool of political choice via your ballot is able to resolve structural violence by voting affirmative. Second, they have conceded that they link to the criticism by reading the alternative as a text. They say, alt, reject the affirmative by putting the plain text under erasure. That is a textual description.
Point of order. We never said that it was a text. I spoke. I didn't hand anyone a copy of it. I didn't say the words the alternative text. I said the alternative. Any argumentation about how that was a text did not come out during the member of government and had to have for me to have an access to respond.
Response.
The NG number 1 on the links is that they're using language and alt text and grammar, meaning that the MO did not respond to this, which means that we're flowing across that they're using alt text.
They are using English. They are linking, they are to link arguing, don't do work for them, something like that. I don't have anything about the plain text. The point is hey.
Okay. 439?
Yeah, 20 years.
Yeah. So let's make that 2 reasons why you're voting for it. Advantage 2 is going to outweigh the criticism, and they have conceded arguments in the permutation indicating that you can vote Aff and still put the plain text under erasure. Probably solves absolutely everything. Go to Advantage 2. You can extend across the arguments that they are conceding, indicating the current structures of parliamentary debate are bad because they create structural violence. The reason why the structural violence is bad is because it creates real-world violence. You can extend across that causes us to do things like Dick Cheney, where we engage in structural violence in the real world, probably enough to mask that away the criticism because we're solving for large amounts of structural violence outside of the context of the room, whereas they're only solving for like themselves or whatever. They even say they're not using the movement. You'd also extend across the solvency arguments, indicating that your tool of political choice to affirm the ways in which we constructed our affirmative is key to resolving that. None of their arguments about using a plain text are responsive to this, but they have conceded that your political choice to vote for the affirmative is what is able to solve for the Advantage 2. That means that they have not said that they solve Advantage 2, and they have not indicted in any way our solvency for Advantage 2. It means that you conclude that we solve for this. When you weigh that against the criticism, we are straight up just outweighing. Anything else?
You should vote for solvency before the lines of thinking that we can solve us.
Yeah, pull across all the solvency indicating you can solve outside their own scope. Growth framework question. They say fiat doesn't exist and you should focus on inclusion. You can extend across or cross by the argument for an advantage, indicating that you're able to vote for the affirmative and thus gain access to solving for this via your usage of political choice via the ballot. We don't rely on fiat to do that. We say that when you vote for us, the ways in which we have constructed our PMC and our Speech Act, that is what is able to resolve. It means that Advantage 2 is still weighable under your framework because it's not based on the idea that like the U.S. government actually sanctions Maduro, but rather based on the ways we constructed our PMC. They say that we still get access to our arguments.
Yes.
The PMR makes this argument that they don't use fiat and thus they don't link. I think that is new.
I wasn't saying we don't use fiat, thus we don't link. I was saying that Advantage 2 does not rely on fiat, therefore we still get to weigh Advantage 2, which I think is something I'm
I'm not taking that point. I think as long as you don't send it to like we don't use fiat.
Yeah, it wasn't.
As long as we keep it to Advantage 2, that's sort of mindset. So
Yeah.
Do you want us to keep on going?
Please do so, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't cost you anything.
They say the alternative, so in the MO, they say that our policy doesn't work because the alternative...
Oh, signposted.
Yeah. Yeah, still different.
Okay.
They say that we create structures that are perfect, which means that we don't focus on actual problems. They have not read the reason why we do this. We've read reasons why these quo is bad in terms of what we do in parliament debate and why voting for the plan makes that change and makes it better. They need a warrant for why we do not do that, or else you should probably reject their claims about that. They say we can see the links. Fine, we link. We'll win the They say that we offer a methodology epistemology. You have not indicted our method. We're winning arguments indicating that our method does a thing, and you have not read reasons why your epistemological argument should indict our method, and you're winning that our methodology does a good thing, i.e. we are a good methodology. They say that, yeah, that's fine. You're weighing our Advantage 2 under their framework, and we are a good epistemology because we are solved back for, justified by the impacts of Advantage 2.
And their link doesn't mean that they've got it.
And their link arguments don't mean that we have bad epistemology, especially when they have not read reasons why we're not able to solve for Advantage 2 or anything like that. Skip links, because apparently I had them different. Let's go to the impacts. I want you to extend across this number 1 argument, indicating that unless we're able to use language to succinctly describe problems, we're never able to solve back for them. That means that things like violence are inevitable. They say we can solve without a plain text if we exclude real change, i.e. you can be a good person without the law. But if you can't explain succinctly like how you're going to take an plan of action to solve for a problem and get other people to join with you to solve for that problem as well, that problem never gets solved and becomes inevitable. That means you need to have descriptions of problems and descriptions of plans and actions in order to solve back for any sort of violence. You would also extend across the mature argument indicating that the plan or the permutation is able to resolve this question because the permutation includes the PMC, which means it includes our descriptions of violence. That means we're able to describe how we solve violence and what we're going to do to solve the violence, which means that we are key to keeping violence from becoming inevitable. I also want you to extend across the number 6 argument indicating that we are not, there's no warrant that we are entrenching our own impacts. They have not read a warrant for why we are taking out our own PMC. We are able to solve for Advantage 2. This is going to concede throughout the round, which means that Advantage 2 is a disadvantage of their alternative because the alternative does not capture it.
Yeah, and when they're talking about we don't understand their thesis
Go to the alternative. I want you to extend across the first alternative, or the first permutation. Do the aff and all non-competitive parts of the alternative. Emily specifically tells you this means that you put the plain text under erasure, but still vote aff. There is a net benefit to this. You're able to solve for advantage 2 by voting aff, because we tell you that that's what solves for advantage 2 via your tool of political choice. You're also able to solve back for the negative because you put the plain text under erasure, which they identified as key. They don't read a reason why putting it under erasure and then voting aff means that they don't go away. They never read an argument about why you have to vote aff in order to solve back for the criticism. All they say is you have to put it under erasure. That means the permutation is on fire in this question because it means you gain access to solving for advantage 2, which we identify as an impact that outweighs the k. It also means we get to solve back for the criticism. You still include the erasure arguments. You say that.
Yes.
Any argument about advantage 2 being a net benefit to the permutation was never made during the MG.
Response.
I think this is like when we say you don't solve for advantage 2 and the plan does, or we move the plan, like I think this is pretty simple impact calculus here.
I also recall saying it during that.
I definitely don't have it during under. I definitely don't have it on your flow. I have the alt doesn't solve for advantage 2, but I don't have anything about how advantage 2 is. I mean, I think it's still pretty much impact. I'll at least take your point under consideration, but I'm inclined to think this is kind of impact.
Okay. They say cooptation leads to worse forms of violence, but articulation of why that's true and more, we can still have erasure. No reason why that cooptation is bad. They say that there's only one part of the alternative. We're telling you the permutation is to put it under erasure and do advantage 2. That means we're able to solve for advantage 2, we're able to solve for the alternative. It means that you're getting the access to the most quantity of impacts, and there's no reason not to do the permutation when these arguments don't make any sense. And they have not read reasons why you can't vote aff, still put it under erasure, and solve for everything.
Thank you guys. This will be a neg ballot, but it will be a low point win. I feel that better debating is done by the affirmative team. They're doing a lot more work, and basically where you are using my ballot is on the disads. So my reason for decision is proper. The permutation co-opts the movement of erasure, re-entrenches the logo-eccentric obsession with the perfect idealized plain text. Once the PMR goes all in on the perm without delinking the disad of the perm, I get to weigh the alt solvency against the second advantage, which I feel is like the second advantage I feel is like the literal embodiment of the criticism, at least as far as it goes on the thesis page, right? Like the fact that like your plan is somehow going to solve for like the real world political impacts of like U.S. soft power in Venezuela and like solving this Red Scare throughout Latin America. And also like increase racial empathy in the debate round with the debate ballot, and like this sort of magic bullet ideal is like codified, and that's kind of what they're talking about, right? So then when I get access to that, then all of a sudden I can look to the impact level, right? And this logocentric ideology gets the impacts of like this border military violence and the sexual genderizing of surgeries at birth and all that other bad things. So really, I'm short of you just saying that, you know, just giving me more of a reason why that like this permutation is not co-optation, and like, and really they make a lot of good arguments about how like you don't really handle Jacob's argument about how like under the alternative the text isn't there, like it's not real, it's crossed out, and like, you know, I don't super understand Derrida a lot. Like it's really deep in this erasure position I've seen a bunch of times, so like I'm a little bit more. I think if you had caught me under one of the other times I had seen this, you probably would have just this would have been an easy ballot. But I'm a little I understand this erasure and how it works a little bit more and how it destabilizes text. And you don't really solve back for how like your permutation still re-entrenches the plan text as the center, right? I think you put a ton of arguments on the flow, and I was super impressed by the MG. And you're the PMR is baller. And just this one little technicality is really where you're sticking for me, and that's just all there is to it. So I mean, I didn't slam your guys' points. I didn't think we were bad debating, but I do think that you guys were the better debaters of this round. Just a small little technicality and just kind of a misunderstanding of the erasure and how that all works.
All right.
Any questions from you guys? I mean, I'll take it. You know, I know that this was a tough decision for me. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah. So yeah, if you got some things to say and are a little upset, I understand. So please have a question.
How do you assess the arguments, EFU/PMR, that it is the act of voting affirmative and using your ballot to affirm us of our speech act rather than like implementing a plan tax that solves advantage to?
Well, right. I mean, I think on that, and on this, on the under the advantage, like that's the argument of the criticism, right? Like that somehow I'm going to vote for this plan tax, and somehow like all these magical things are going to happen, right? Like to me, that's like doing a lot of work for them on that page, and that's just basically where I'm at. And when you kind of say that like the second advantage is just going to outweigh, like I feel like the impacts of the criticism.
Okay. So you thought we solved advantage 2 with the criticism just outweighed it?
I thought that your going for the solvency of advantage 2 is what really links you into the criticism.
Right, but at the end of the day, like that link made it in your mind, so we solved advantage 2, but we went through the criticism, so that's worse impacts.
I mean, I won't say you solved advantage 2, but it's conceded on the flow, so yes, I guess you would have solved advantage 2. Yes.
Okay.
Sweet.
That's all I got.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.